Hello, I'm the Smoking Cheddar, but you probably already knew that. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're talking about bombers. I put out a community post and this was requested. As usual, we will go through the tech, we'll go through the units, and then we'll go through a series of scenarios in which these are useful. So, gentlemen, if you please, make sure your headphones are in. Your missus is busy watching EastEnders. It's hot out there. Make sure you have yourself a drink. Non-alcoholic, we don't wish to dehydrate. And if you're hungry, make sure you got some snacks. So as always, we're only really interested in the advanced because most of these videos that I produce are aimed at people within the silver bracket. And as always, we're interested predominantly in the picture tech, which will be all-weather combat and will be Valkyrie, because the other picture tech is for fighters, and I covered that in the fighter deep dive. So Valkyrie, we'll just crack on with this. When your bombers leave your base, their speed is increased by 30% for 10 seconds. Now, when it comes to scenarios, you need to keep this in the back of your mind, because this can make the difference between life and death in regards to whether your base can survive or whether or not you can snipe out AGs. So keep this in mind, because this is an exceptionally useful one. I don't have it unlocked yet, but I'm working on it. All-weather combat. When your airplanes start a battle, their firepower is increased by 5% every second for a maximum of 25% until they leave battle, which is exceptionally useful for fighters and also for bombers. We'll cover why once we get to the units. Now, we're not going to really look into the modern tech, it's just the advanced tech. There are a couple that are worth noting. We do get disruptor ammo, base and troop damage resist, and titanium armor, base and troop damage resist. We actually get this twice, so you can get yourself an extra 20% damage resist on this tree for your bombers, and trust me, that's really helpful. Bombers are not particularly strong. They don't take much to be shot out of the sky at all. I've been doing it most silvers with a 7.2 fighter or even a 7.1 fighter, and as soon as you get into that modern fighter bracket in silver, modern bombers don't stand much of a chance. That goes the same for light tanks and anti-tank guns on the ground as well. Once they're pointed to the sky, very, very, very good at taking out bombers. So these are definitely worth noting, that you can get an extra 20% for your base and a 20% for your bomber. We're interested, as always, in this little bar here. Now, the Martyr get a camp bonus of Tank Killer, deals more damage to tanks than bombers from other camps. This, when you're choosing a bomber, if you have the luxury of choosing a bomber, I should say, then these can really make or break how you play your bomber. If you're in a position where you can choose, it's a good idea to choose wisely. While two of them operate similarly, they deal damage in a slightly different way. So you have this bomber is the first dive bomber. I refer to them as dive bombers. They're not dive bombers. They home in on a target and they chase that target down. But we call them dive bombers in Salt. We have the Liberty bomber. Multi-grid bombing, Liberty bombers can deal continuous damage to enemies in 7 map grid. So you get a 2, a 3 and a 2 if you've not used it. It's the equivalency of a strategic bomber. These are better at destroying bases, or they were, prior to the September wall buff that came last year. Now these are pretty good defensive bombers, or if a base has been destroyed, you can use it to pick off the units without risk. And lastly, this is the one I rock, the Vanguard Bomber, and the Vanguard Bombers can simultaneously deal damage to all visible units within the same map grid. Now, I actually got asked this a couple of days ago. What does that mean? Well, I will quickly demonstrate. Here we have all visible units in that map grid. There are 5 tanks in that MBT unit. Now, in a normal situation, when they engage another unit like this, they will target 2 or 3, a few shots will miss, and you'll eliminate the group in stages. You'll eliminate the enemy unit in stages. With the Vanguard Bomber, what will happen is that you will deal damage equally in one hit to absolutely everything in the map grid. Bad example, it had too little in the way of hit points, but you get what I mean. Instead of your 5 tanks shooting at 5 tanks and it hitting 3 of the tanks and 1 potentially missing, your 2 bombers hit all 5 tanks in that map grid at the same time for the same amount of damage. So that is also a dive bomber. So what's the difference really between the Vanguard Bomber and the Marty Bomber? And the difference between the Vanguard and Marty Bomber is literally just how the damage is applied and what bonuses those damages subsequently get. So a Marty Bomber is very, very, very good at picking off tanks. Okay, this is what you wanted to do. You see an enemy tank out in the field, plink, 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 you're taking off the tank. The Vanguard Bomber can still destroy the tank. It operates in the same way. It chases the target, much like the Marty Bomber. It will attack the target even if it's moving, just like the Marty Bomber. But the Vanguard won't get bonus damage for it being a tank, but it will flatly deal the same amount of damage to all tanks in that map grid at that time. So maybe, if you're using a Vanguard Bomber, adjust what you're attacking to something with lower HP, things like helicopters or artillery pieces, because these have slightly lower damage resist and blast damage resist. You can then use that to level the playing field a little bit more. So that's really the two difference between the 2 bombers. Obviously, the Lib Bomber plays completely different. You select a map grid, and the 6 adjacent tiles are then bombed, which means the enemy AG can either move around it or move out of its way. So is that a better bomber? Is it a worse bomber? We'll explore. And I'm going to say some things that are going to be very unpopular with a few of you right now in regards to officers. I know this is going to be the case because my view on officers is not the same as what a lot of people who come to me and tell me what their views are. You know, that's fine. You're entitled to a different opinion. That's perfectly fine. If you're playing the game differently, again, that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying my opinion is the be-all and end-all. I am just giving you a fair warning that I'm going to tell you a lot of these officers are bad from my perspective. So, which officers would I use on any of the bombers? The first officer will be Sebastian here, El Cartero, and the second one would be Lone Eagle, for the pure and simple fact that when this guy is on a Martyr or a Vanguard Bomber, he is dealing a lot of coefficient damage. A lot of coefficient damage. And El Cartero is also dealing a significant amount of coefficient damage, and he can stun the target in its spot for 2 seconds. But that is for Martyr and Vanguard Bombers. For a Liberty Bomber, I would actually swap Lone Eagle in favour of Rising Star. I feel that he is the next best thing, and that is simply because he deals damage coefficiency. Now, I am aware that you get a damage and speed boost with Lone Eagle. I've covered this. I don't think, personally, if you're running a Lib Bomber, having a speed boost and a flat damage boost is going to trump the skill damage bonus of 1000 coefficiency that comes from Rising Star. This is my view. It is unpopular. So those are the 2 officers, or 3 as the case actually is. Those are the 3 officers I would use on the bombers. I would not deviate from this. And that is because coefficiency damage or skill damage is multiplied effectively by your base damage stat, which is a substat, as we know, of firepower. So these guys deal a lot of coefficient damage, these 3 officers, and you want to be able to employ them as such. Now, Lone Eagle does not apply coefficient damage when he is on the Liberty Bomber, which is probably got something to do with the fact that it can attack 7 map grids, and they decided that that probably wasn't a good idea. So let's see what else Rising Star has to offer for us. He has a cruising speed buff, which is a speed up. His awakened ability increases the bomber's efficiency by 20%, and the skill damage is increased quite significantly. Each bombing run deals extra skill damage to their targets. Damage coefficiency of 1700. The skill damage is reduced by 20% for each additional target hit. So probably not good on a Vanguard, but if you were having him on a Barty bomber, he's worth looking at. I mean, 1700 per target hit, and you're going to hit, say, maybe 3 targets on a bombing run, and you're going to get a 20% reduction on each one of those. That's still quite a lot of skill damage. Would I prefer him over El Cartero? El Cartero, obviously, he deals 1300 damage coefficiency, significantly less. He also has a 20% penalty, but he does stop the target from moving for 2 seconds, and he does apply burning to the unit over 100 over 4 seconds. It really depends on whether you would rather stun the target for 2 seconds or try and wipe it out within 2 passes. Sometimes the stun's going to be better if they're running to their base. Sometimes the damage is going to be better. It's very situational. Personally, I have gone with Cartero.
Back in the day,
that does not make me right. I would like to stress that. Lone Eagle, his awakened ability. If you've got a coalition troop within 1 map grid, you get bonus coefficient damage, which is easy to accomplish if you're moving all of your air assets together. So generally, if you're bombing an area, you've got your fighters up. Now, bombers and fighters, I would recommend 2 fighters and a bomber per player. I wouldn't recommend 2 bombers. The reason being is how you now use bombers. So since September of last year, that is September of 2023, the wall upgrades for your base now have much more damage resist versus being bombed from the air. And this was to stop people from maxing out a Lib Bomber and just leveling your base in about 3 or 4 runs, which made sense. The problem is that then changed the dynamic on how to use the Lib Bomber. So the Lib Bomber is pretty good in an AG fight because there's going to be a lot of units in a very small space. Even if you miss your main target, there's a high probability you're going to hit something. And as that AG gets closer to your base, the Lib Bomber becomes more of a defensive unit, which is why having that 30% speed up from the tech to leave your base is very good. It means if your base is under attack, you can pop both of your fighters out, you can dominate the airspace, and then you can use your bomber to pick off artillery, main battle tanks, and anything else you so wish. So that is how I would use the Lib Bomber going forwards. I've had a Lib Bomber myself. I got it up to 8.0. They're very, very, very fun units. Very fun units. And this is indeed how I used it. If I was under attack, my bomber would come out and I would carpet bomb an area. Remember, MBTs, helicopters, infantry, anything that needs to move out of the way, artillery of that bomber, if they decide to move it, it has to stop firing. So it takes less damage, but then it's going to take more damage from the guns inside your base. If they choose to leave it there and you have a lot of damage coefficiency and they have no way of knocking it out of the sky because they don't have the fighter support to defeat your fighters above your base, then they're going to have to take the casualties through the bomber. So the Lib Bomber is an exceptionally good close range defensive unit. Exceptionally good, bar none. Bar none. There are very few units that I could say you can pop this out of the base and you can see results immediately. That is why people need the Lib Bomber. It's also good at taking out medium to weak bases. As you go further down the tech tree and you start looking into modern tech as well, the bombers just become ridiculously powerful. If you are in fact in silver, you can still bomb bases. It's very difficult and you do take losses, but you can do it. Now, that's the Lib Bomber. We've spoken about the differences between the Vanguard and the Vanguard and the Martyr Bomber. But the only difference really is what you're targeting. You know, you're basically targeting main battle tanks from the air, or light tanks from the air, or super heavies with the Martyr because you're getting the bonus damage. And with the Vanguard, you're targeting helicopters, infantry, and you're targeting predominantly artillery. Now, it's not to say that you shouldn't target artillery as a priority with the Martyr Bomber. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. I believe if you have the opportunity to bomb the artillery, you take that first. 100% all day, every day. So this plays into an air superiority tactic, or an air superiority strategy, I should say. So if your alliance has very dominant fighters in the sky and you control the airspace above an AG battle, then bring out the Vanguard and Martyr bombers and start taking out the weak units at the back, the units that are recharging at the back. Take out the artillery units, the ones that you can hit in one pass. Just remove the firepower from the board. That's all you're doing. Is if you're donating your tanks, you're donating your artillery, you're donating your helicopters to the AGs. You're a bomber player. You take that bomber and you start targeting those ground units. That's what you need to be doing. But in order for that to be successful, you do need to have air dominance. You need to have those fighters winning all of the available air battles, which is, again, why I suggest if you are going down that road, you do have two fighters. You should probably prioritize fighters over bombers for this simple reason. A 7.2 bomber can destroy an 8.2 artillery piece, providing you've invested statues into the relevant officers. So keep that in mind. Now, as the AGs get closer to your base, the dive bombers, the Vanguard and Martyr bombers, become less and less effective. If you have air superiority, you can just keep picking off those artillery units, and eventually you'll be in a position where you can start picking off the tanks. This is where the Martyr bomber will start to pull away from the Vanguard bomber. They'll probably both wipe out the artillery at the same rate, if I'm honest, but the Martyr bomber will start to make noticeable gains over the Vanguard bomber in this particular part of this scenario. You've eliminated the artillery and they're down to tanks. Now, if you've been on the receiving end of this, which Salt has, in November of last year, 2023, we did not dominate the sky in Cairo, and every time an AG left the safety net of our bases anti-air and moved towards our enemies' bases, they would put fighter coverage up, and then they would use dive bombers to just pick off our artillery before we even made it to their front door. And then it was a case of a tank-on-tank battle before we even got to the base. So it's very demoralizing, and it's also extremely effective. These bombers are basically to be used as sniping units. You're picking off weak units you know you can kill in 1 or 2 passes, and then you're returning them immediately. The downside is if you, like I say, I will keep saying this over and over again until I drill it into you, if you don't have that air superiority with fighters, you will start losing bombers, and it will make a noticeable impact on what you're trying to accomplish. So if you are going to go down the air road, you need to start thinking in terms of fighters before you think in terms of bombers. That is exactly what I've done, and it's paying dividends. I'm now the L4 I'm in is now finished, and I have an 8.0 bomber. I'm looking at bringing that up to an 8.1 max. And then I'm going to be looking at getting my second fighter in the sky, because I want to have a wing up at the same time, and I want to make sure that bomber is safe and that bomber is able to do its job unmolested from enemy fighters. And we have been on the receiving end, this L4, of a very good player who had 2 fighters that were both 15 million, and they were both interceptors, and we couldn't get half of our air power off the ground. It took 5 or 6 players just to take him down, and then we were able to proceed. But if we didn't have the numbers, the ball was in their court. So everyone should be working on a fighter. And if you're looking at the bombers, then you should probably be looking at being a donator for AGs. So tanks, helicopters, maybe an RL because it moves quickly. And you can then max out your air pretty quickly if you target it. Now, there's not a great deal that we can say in terms of what else you can do with bombers, unfortunately. Like I say, the Martyr and Vanguard bombers are specifically for sniping out units at the rear or units at the front, depending on the situation. There isn't many officers I would personally recommend. There's only 3, and that's we've covered that. These are as limited in their role as they are significant. They sound unimportant as a result of being so limited in what they can and can't do, that people often overlook the importance of air in this game. And if you have been on the receiving end of an air campaign, I can tell you now, your AGs do not survive. They will not be able to continuously combat the onslaught of bombers from the air, and that needs to be backed up by fighters. Because when they try and snipe your bombers out of the air, you need to have your fighters on hand to knock out their fighters. Punish them for doing it. So guys, I hope we've done something here. It feels like a very short video. I don't really know what else I can say about the bombers. They're a very simple unit, but I hope I've explained maybe how best to use them from my point of view. And yes, I'm aware some of you are going to disagree and say Pixie's the best officer, or what. That's fine. If you're using different officers, you're allowed to do that. That's fine. That's entirely fine. I play differently. That's also okay. There'll be a link in the description box below to my Discord channel. You're more than welcome to come and join in the degeneracy that's there. Just remember to donate pizza to the rules. If you don't, the bot doesn't let you continue and see all the other channels. If you do happen to see me in the voice chat, feel free to drop by, providing you've got yourself at least earphones and a microphone of some description, whether it be in-ear or a gaming headset like this if you're on desktop, because there will be other people more than likely in chat, and we don't want to hear your blender going off, or you making a cup of coffee, or your wife watching EastEnders or Emmerdale, or whatever, or your dog's barking, or your kids throwing stuff. We will just we will just tease you if that happens, and we will just keep teasing you. But you're more than welcome to join, say hello. If you do join the Discord and you don't want to do that, that's also fine. You feel free to @me. I have nothing to do most days at work, so you're more than welcome to @me, and I will reply. If you have a question about how I play the game, again, you're more than welcome to send me a message. So, guys, thanks for watching. A very peculiarly short episode on Deep Dive, which I have managed to string out quite a bit longer than I should have.